Hi everyone, I'm Dan Elliott and welcome to the DokuPen channel. Now we have the texture drawing in the right place under the crosshair, we need to make it possible to draw on any surface and have each surface be given its own damage texture. First we're going to change how we create the brush material at runtime. Previously we were creating a new one every time we hit a mesh, but that isn't necessary as we only need one brush at any one point. So let's take the node and bring it to the begin play section so that we'll create it only once. So we'll connect it up into the chain here, and so that we can use the brush later on when we want to draw into a render target, we can save the newly created brush instance into a variable in the blueprint itself. The easiest way to do that is to drag off a pin and click the Promote to Variable option. And we'll make sure that we connect up the Set Variable node into the node chain here. And that pretty much deals with that issue. And we'll see soon how we can use that variable. Now let's tackle the other issue, which is that we need a way to have a unique render target per object, so that each hit mesh can have its own damage render target that accumulates the unique places that it was hit. The way we'll achieve this is through something called a map data structure. Maps allow us to store variables much like built-in arrays, but instead of storing a bunch of variables and retrieving them with an index into the array, where the index is a position of where the variable is, with maps, the way you retrieve a variable is by using another variable as a key which we associate with the thing you're storing. The way this works is that when you store a variable in a map, you provide a key which could be an integer or a string or another data type, which the map associates with the value you are storing. When you want to get the value back, you provide the key and the map knows how to get the value for you, and you don't have to know where it is in the map. So let's create the map, which we can do in the variables list with the plus button. And I'll name it map name to RT, because we're going to use the mesh names as the key which we'll associate with the render targets. Over in the variable type, we can change the type to string, and there's an icon next to the type, which is usually where you can change the type to something like a string array, or in this case, choose the bottom icon to make it into a map. Doing this makes the string the key type, and now we get another type appear on the right, which is what we want the stored value type to be. And we want this to be a texture render target 2D object type. This means we will be able to store render targets and get them back with a particular string unique to the texture. For the string we want to use as the key, we need to get the name of the mesh that was hit. So we can get that from the hit result that was returned from the line trace. It conveniently gives us the actor that was hit, and we can drag out a pin from it and create a getObjectName node. Then we'll get our map container variable, and if we hit a mesh, we first want to check to see if there's already an entry in the map with that particular mesh name as a key. So from the map, create a contains node. Plug in the name of the object hit, and this contains node will tell us if it already exists in the map. If there isn't, it will return a Boolean false value, and we can branch on that condition. I'll comment this section which is hit object in map. So if the key isn't found in the map, that means that we're safe to go and put something in there. We can create a brand new render target right here in Blueprint, which will create it during gameplay dynamically, as opposed to doing it explicitly in the content browser. And that means we don't have to do it for every possible object we want to apply it to. This way we're only creating as many render targets as needed, depending on how many objects we've hit. I'll make them have a default resolution of 1024 squared for now, and make them have a single channel 16-bit float format. Then we want to store that render target into the map. Get the variable, and we can use the adds node to enter the render target into the map. For this we need to connect up the execution pin, and for the key associated with the render target, we'll grab the object name variable, and finally for the value we just need the render target we just created. Right after we've done that, we'll want to apply that unique render target to the hit object, and we'll need to set a parameter on the material of the object, which we can only do on material instances. So let's create a unique material instance based on the material that the object already has. We'll get the hit mesh component of the actor and from there we can use the getMaterial node to retrieve that material. Next, we'll use a createDynamicMaterial instance node again, and create one with the base material as the parent. Then we can get that component reference again and set the material onto it with a setMaterial node. Hook up the execution pin, and the material that we set is the new instance. To set the render target on the material instance, we can use one of the setParameter nodes, which for some reason I have to uncheck the context sensitive checkbox to make it show up, but we want the texture variation of the setParameter nodes. The target is the newly created dynamic material instance. The parameter is damageRT, and the render target value itself isn't one from the content browser, but the one that we just created and put in the map. Before this will work though, we have to make sure that the material that the instances are based off has a parameter called damageRT that we can actually set. So go back to the main material, and we simply need to create a texture object parameter 2D node, which is the node that we will be controlling from Blueprint to set the texture. And by default, we want it to be blank. So we can point it towards that blank render target that we saw earlier as an example. Then we can take the texture object, and that feeds into the text input of the texture sample node to tell it which texture to sample from. To set the name of the parameter node, we can copy it from the Blueprint node to make sure that the text is exactly the same. And if we hit play, nothing's happening, and that is because we forgot to connect up the command to set the brush position and actually draw the brush into the render target. So move the set vector parameter and draw material nodes over to the end after we've set the render target parameter. And just connect up the execution pins, and for the draw material node, we'll use the brush material that we stored as a variable at the beginning of this video. And finally, we need to set the render target as the unique per mesh target that we just created. Oops, and we also need to set the target of the vector parameter to the brush material variable. Now, when we hit play, we can see that we hit the mesh and we get a hit, but that any subsequent hits don't register. That's because we only handled the case where we didn't find anything in the map with the object name. So in the next video, we need to handle the case where we've already hit something and we find the entry in the map with the same name as the object we've hit again, which is the whole point of why we use the map in the first place. But we can see that if we hit another object with the same base material, then we get a unique render target for that object, as they're no longer sharing the same textures. And just to show that this works in the general case, I can create multiple objects from the Modes panel and place them around the world and give them the same base material. Now we can play and see that it responds correctly, and they each get their own damage texture. So I'll see you in the next video.